Before we dive into the video, a quick word from our sponsor, TradeStation. As tape readers, we rely heavily on TradeStation for their time and sales. TradeStation offers ATC students an account representative, zero commission, and a cash reward with qualifying deposits. Now back to the video. Hello and welcome everyone to the 11th ATC Tape Reading Podcast. My name is David Torres and I'm a longtime student with ATC. A couple announcements before we dive into this session is we have free night shift reviews at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every weekday, essentially. Those are free to all members and just anybody that's willing to join. It's currently free for everyone at the moment. Won't stay that way forever. And then also all new members get our free 1 through 4 course, which is 20 hours of our 1 through 4 setups, which is completely free, which used to be a paid package. With that taken care of, it's my pleasure to introduce ATC student David A. David, how are you doing today?
Yeah, really well, thanks, David. Yourself?
Not too bad. You're tuning in from across the globe essentially, right?
Yeah, and I'm in Sydney, Australia. So yeah, it makes interesting trading in terms of with the time difference. But when there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, and yeah, that time frame obviously changes and it's difficult. You come to the afternoon sessions is really when you can. But with that being said, have you found opportunity within the afternoons? I know that was kind of one of your biggest concerns with, coming into trading, especially this methodology was, could you apply it to the afternoon? Have you had some success with that? Have you seen the opportunity there with that?
Yeah, I have, and I think it's certainly with the way energy stocks have been moving lately. There's no
Mhm.
shortage of opportunity in the afternoon. I think where there may be a little bit of a gap is sort of not knowing what sort of prints were there in earlier on in the day in that particular stock, but yeah, typically in an afternoon, and I find it really comes down to quality, not quantity, that there's
Mhm.
enough opportunities there to trade the afternoon.
Yeah, you really have to treat, the prints that come in as, a new story because you don't have all the information beforehand. So that could really make things a little tricky, but kind of transitioning into your journey, can you give us a little insight into where you began trading, maybe some previous education that you had? What methodology did you had in that process look like for you?
Yeah, sure. So it was around 20, I mean, that's of an interest in stocks and trading for a number of years, but it was
Hmm.
in 2016 that I'd, you know, decided that I wanted to, really explore day trading.
Hmm.
And so I joined a trading school, the one prior to being with ATC. It was called Cyber Trading University.
Hmm.
And look, knowing what I know now, they essentially taught me how to be a retail trader.
Hmm.
And so, you'd sort of learn all the sort of stuff that you would expect to learn, when you're learning to trade like a retail trader. Maybe there was a couple of extra add-ons. They use things like print lines and maybe some pre-market activity. But at the end of the day, it all came down to essentially support and resistance. And that sort of brought its issues in terms of like having some sort of trading system and a way to sort of be able to map out a plan.
Mm. So was there any black and white rules that were, you had to say discipline to, maybe not black and white, but rules that you could adhere to keep you disciplined and accountable for to really find the setups that are high percentage with?
Well, look, the only thing I found that I could really focus on was things like, trying to cut losses short and things of that nature. Because the challenge was when you're just trading support and resistance is it was very difficult to sort of map targets. And when you can't map out, a potential target, trying to measure risk reward becomes very tricky and things like that. So yeah, it was tricky. It was really I found it challenging, in terms of being able to, outside of following following volume, and it really sort of put you in the place of being a momentum trader, which has its limitations to say the least.
Yeah. And how long were you at that, university or, education service for? And, did you find any
Yeah,
success? Were there periods of success and within that methodology?
I was probably about 4 years on and off. There were other things that I did in the meantime, between crypto swing trading and some startups. It was probably about 4 years. And look, not really. For me, at best case scenario, I was treading water the
Mm.
whole time there, which I really fell into that category of the 93% of retail traders, and yeah, the fact that I didn't lose my my shirt, during that time, I'm somewhat grateful for.
Yeah, and kind of leading into tape reading, you kind of focus on that support and resistance and momentum type. I mean, knowing what you know now, with ATC being so tape reading focused, and we're following smart money market makers, we're really diving into what the tape is telling us rather than what the chart is telling us. So just kind of reflecting between the trader you were back then and now, what has been the biggest transition and, what has shaped you the most? Kind of just take us through the transition that you have had to face, maybe unlearning some possible, bad habits as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So look, I'd probably say the two key things I noticed with ATC, because before I signed up, I watched pretty much all the YouTube videos that you had, and there were two things that really stood out to me. I mean, firstly, the understanding what the market maker is up to in terms of what their intentions are, and actually, you know, seeing that unfold, and really, behind the name of ATC being ahead of the charts. So we could see certain prints, knowing that the stock was going to do this, that, and the other, and be able to see that ahead of time. That to
Mhm.
me was profound in itself. But then the next thing that really, really resonated with me was the fact that there was a very simple and elegant system with the number one through to number four trade setups.
Mhm.
And, I, because along my journey in the last trading school and I'm not making headway, I was sort of looking for answers. And I came across this great book called The Mental Game of Trading by a
Great
guy
book.
called Jared Tendler.
Mhm.
And there's sort of two key things I took away. One was sort of on the emotional side, how to become emotionally aware and to understand what are the limiting beliefs behind those emotions and the reframing and all that sort of thing. But the other thing was to have a very solid and defined process and to have metrics around your process.
Mm.
Now that was new to me because I'd had metrics in the past, but they're all sort of outcome driven. And because there wasn't a clearly defined process, my biggest challenge is like, well, when you don't have a process, it's very easy to start accumulating bad habits because
Mm.
you don't know where you're going wrong, you don't know where you can improve, and like Rich says, the easiest thing to develop is a bad habit. So that's where I was walking into ATC, and then I think in my time in ATC, and I've only been a member since like October last year, it's really been the two things. Obviously, the learning curve that comes with tape reading, and there's obviously a lot of nuance that goes into those, number one through to number four trade setups. But then also the other thing that's sort of going hand in hand with that is unpacking or undoing a lot of the bad habits that have compounded over those 4 or so years. And so the two have sort of been, and I can already see a tremendous progress, after sort of 3 full months of trading. And I've actually, even last month, I actually had my highest win rate percentage, over a month than I ever had in the previous 4 years. And I did it within 3 months of having a system that I'm still at the infancy of understanding, how to read tape reading. So
Yeah.
to me, that sort of shows a lot of promise. I went from a place of before where I'm like, am I going to make it in day trading to now I feel like it's just a matter of when. So it's been a very different sort of shift in having that system and that superior understanding of the market maker who really, at the end of the day is what drives stocks. Whereas as a retailer, you're there as basically, cannon fodder for the market makers.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine, not having a 1 through 4 setup or not having, outline specific setups that you have to, assign percentages to. I feel like at that point you're just taking anything based upon feel. And I don't think feel ever translates into like that data perspective, right? You can't quantify feel at the end of the day. You can quantify your 1 through 4 trades and you can quantify the variables that go within those 1 through 4 trades and you can journal those and you can reflect back upon, okay, what led to this shake on this 1 through 4 trade. And a lot of times the answers will present themselves and they will through personality or the tape. So the thing with this methodology is it's really friendly to journal. And especially if you, like when we do these night reviews as well, there's such key information to be able to look back on. And I just think being able to assign percentages to, the person we're following and the market maker, it makes a difference of everything. I can't imagine, if you had an indicator or something and, taking something based upon that is I can't. I mean, I was lucky and blessed to be able to find this methodology first, and this is all I've ever known. So I've never had to unlearn previous bad habits. I know we've had many students that have come through, and half the battle is just unlearning the bad habits that they once did before, and they still fight it even a couple years later. So with that unlearning process, and you're kind of moving forward with really, you said you had your highest win percentage, and you're starting to move the ball forward. What are some of your biggest current, like within your journals, what are some of your biggest areas of opportunity that you've noticed based upon the methodology? Because obviously, like the 1 through 4 trades, they're not black and white, because you'll have a number one setup based upon the prints that show, but personality and the off-level prints will tell you this is an exception day, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, I see the learning process as an iterative process. So I can remember when I first started, it was, my first goal was, being able to just identify controlling prints. And then from there, it went to, okay, then add on top of that the reaction to those controller prints. And then, like we've sort of seen in the night shift reviews lately, it's been learning the nuance of off-level prints.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's sort of adding on all the time from that side of things. But again, it's sort of the stuff that's coming out in journaling and tied in with that are probably a lot of the mistakes that I think a lot of beginners make with things like false triggers and and then some of the old habits like not be able to cut losses short and then things like that. So it still really is that paradigm of going through the learning curve, and the fact that other students who've gone through the similar same sort of learning struggles really shows you um, how sort of robust this methodology is, that you are going through the same type of learning curve that any other student would. Whereas when you're just trying to trade technical analysis, TA teaches you one thing, but what happens in reality is completely different.
Yeah, it's interesting how the same challenges, through this journey of tape reading, kind of reoccur to every student, right? Sometimes it'll be, timing. You'll have your whole read correct based upon the controlling print and the market maker's intention, but your timing is off. You'll get shaken out and the trade will go in your direction. And there's certain little, mistakes, if you want to call them that, that really present themselves that are consistent throughout my learning process, which is it makes it really easy to in those night reviews to really point out my previous mistakes and what took to fix those mistakes. Like we mentioned off level timing, because I had just looking at percentages of what the intentions of the market makers were. 70-80% of the time I had my overall read correct, but I couldn't get that timing down. So what I had to do was really dial in on the short term timing frame prints and personality, and then that my timing ended up increasing in terms of percentage wise, and so on. But is there any constant themes in your journal that you've noticed? Maybe it's I'm cutting my winners too soon. Maybe it's just not being as calculated with your pullbacks or your price targets. Have you noticed certain consistent themes within your journaling, or has it been one day it's not cutting your losers and the other day it's cutting your profits too soon?
Yeah, so it's probably a combination. I would still
Mhm.
put it down to things like entering in on a false trigger. Like it's like what Rich calls the curse of tape reading, right? You
Mhm.
know where the stock needs to go at some point, and that really sort of, I guess, forcing the trade instead of waiting for the prints to tell you that it's time, and sort of coordinating the prints with volume. Like I feel like I'm slowly getting better at reading the tape, but there are many a times where I'm just not correlating that with the volume. So
Mhm.
I guess that a lot of the challenges are sort of like understanding, learning each of the individual pieces of the puzzle. And then the next part is how do you then combine those different pieces of the puzzle together to make the full picture. So and for me, I guess with journaling, I've always sort of been, meticulous with journaling. But as I'm learning more, it's sort of also given me an opportunity to be able to tweak my journaling further, whether I sort of refine what sort of metrics I use, or, just knowing that there are particular, weak points in my trading and to focus on those. So, and my trading, I sort of make a point to sort of, yeah, it's great to sort of capture what the wins were, but where am I sort of falling over? Where are the weaknesses? So that if I start seeing a trend there, then I make that my focus for the next while to make those changes. And that's
Mm.
how I've been chipping away, at least at the undoing of the bad habits, at least, as well as still going through the learning curve that I'm going through.
Yeah, and would you say, that focus has been off-level timing? Because you say false triggers, so that's just more or less, overall what needs to happen, but you're kind of jumping the gun a little bit.
Yeah, so I think one thing I have a challenge, I'm actually going to be sending through a question for Traders Exchange tomorrow, is just
Mhm.
really understanding what is the required volume out of a consolidation,
Mhm.
that's actually would qualify as a trigger. And it's sort of, the thing I'm sort of learning is that there's a bit of a, yes, there's a minimum threshold, but then there's also a sweet spot, because if you get too much volume, then it potentially could be an unsustainable move. So it's sort of learning a lot more of that sort of nuance
Mhm.
around uh, that sort of aspect. And like I'm so fixated at looking at the tape, I just miss the volume. I see a bunch of activity and a bunch of off-level prints that sort of say it's go time, but then I forget to look at the volume on the chart and to not piece it together. And sometimes I'll see that sort of burst of activity, but the volume just isn't there for that. That happens a lot of the time, I think, in my false triggers.
Yeah, and I think you have a special circumstance because you're trading specific afternoon. So, the afternoon can be a little more difficult with follow through, right? So it can be difficult with, to capture that retail attention or to release the stock or just to, gather the interest as much as possible. They have to, lower volume, and typically with afternoons with the stocks we trade, it's going to be a little more difficult for them to build. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well, is triggers in the morning are going to be vastly easier to take and have more follow through than a trigger in the afternoon. And that's something that maybe you could formulate in your traders exchange question. For those that don't know, a traders exchange is every Tuesday we have a live market lesson. Rich, answers all our questions that we send in, and he uses live stocks, from the morning that we traded to really break down that specific question. But that could really the transition. I think this is gonna be a great question. Maybe we can formulate it right now. you know, how do we transition our triggers and our volume to the afternoon? Because, there's the odds and percentage of getting followed through in the afternoon is going to be a lot different, and our percentage is going to be a lot, uh, they're going to vary there in that instance, in those situations, in those setups. So, what does that really need to look like?
And I think, look, the positive side of having it being a lot more difficult is that it's also taught me to be a lot more patient
Mm.
in my trade setups, because that was one issue where because of the lack of system in the past, there'd be days where I used to take 10 to 15 trades and end up in the red. Whereas now I find I only take maybe two or three trades, but it's more about quality than quantity. And I think being forced to wait for the right sort of circumstances is improving my ability to have patience and to not force what I want onto the markets.
Mm. Yeah, no, and especially the afternoons. I think the afternoons obviously require a lot more discipline than, I mean, obviously the whole trading day requires discipline, but more so the afternoon because, the market makers can play more games given the fact that the volume is not there. So that's something I've noticed in my trading is, I kind of break down, you know, what did the follow through look like in the morning and the follow through in the afternoon? Because there's instances where a stock will become, an exception in the afternoon and have greater volume than it did the whole morning. And then there's opposite where, the stock will have the greatest volume in the morning and then in the afternoon it'll be a lot less and it'll be a lot consistently less, right? So I mean there's situations that I really document, but when I take afternoon trades I'm a lot less focused in the afternoon, I've noticed. And I tend to also shake in a lot more in the afternoon than during the morning. So that's something I'm still trying to chip away at as well. But I think that'd be a great question for traders exchange, is just you know our thought process and what we need to see. Do we need to see more volume, right, than what was presented in the morning, for our percentages to be
Right.
increased? Yeah. So
Sure.
kind of transitioning as well is, what concepts are you finding a little more challenging right now that maybe you have circled that you just really can't? I mean, obviously false triggers. That's one that we kind of outlined was the main one. There's any more concepts maybe overall that you just cannot grasp or understand, or maybe you're chipping away at a little bit, little by little.
Yeah. There's one that really stands out, and I definitely want to do, the last set of classes again, to sort of really try and get a better understanding is the personality of a stock.
Mm.
And and I guess watching the sort of the night shift reviews and seeing how a trade behaves in the morning even versus the afternoon. and seeing how it can vary and what you would expect for a number one trade versus a number four trade. I think that's the thing that sort of has thrown me off probably, as much as the false triggers is I'm still not at that place yet where I can really understand the personality of the stock to know whether it's going to give a pullback or not, or whether it's going to go parabolic and then give us that number one setup. So that is still where I think I'll probably have the most sort of challenge with at the moment.
Is just maybe transitioning from Prince to just defining personality. And I think that's kind of one of the last pieces. It's interesting because, in my student journey, the Prince and understanding the overall game plan is the easiest part, but when it comes to personality, that's definitely one of the larger mountains to climb. But once you do climb it, they leave the same clues over and over and over again. Like Oxy, I think last Friday as well, just the exception mode when we went over, or I think it was Thursday, we went the night shift review. Those exceptions leave clues behind. So if we're going to be looking for a number one short trade off something that's super extended, the market makers already told us that it was going to build. If we don't get that selling in those shorter term positions or the shorter term day traders that are showing they're going to make money to the short side, our percentage isn't there for our number one short trade. And then we have to transition our mind. Okay, if the percentages aren't there, then what are their tensions? And then we start analyzing the substance, and then you start seeing significant off-level buying that's above print personality, that's shorter time frame. And then you can start transitioning your mind. Okay, there's buying above. Are we pulling back and there's even greater buying? Statistically, the percentages here are for the number four trade. I really think,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, off level, just truly understanding off level has been the biggest game changer for me. That's transitioned me from, maybe a decent trader to a lot better of a trader. I take a lot less shakes, and I get the overall concept of off level because the off level timing prints and the money flow really correlates into what the overall market maker game plan is. Whether that's not building now, whether that's money time now, whether they're pushing it to sell off their position, whether they're building a short. It tells you pretty much everything you need to do, everything you need to know in terms of time frame. Obviously, it's called timing prints, but I think just understanding them is definitely the biggest mountain, in my opinion, when it comes to the student journey. To be honest, and it's not
Sure.
easy at
And
all.
look, I can definitely appreciate. But what I find is incredibly value is these night shift reviews where we will all get on and have trades review and having people like yourself or Rich be able to talk us through your thought process as a trade unfolds has been incredibly valuable in terms of understanding these sort of concepts that I think if I had to sort of just go off classes and my own trading would have taken much longer. So
Mm.
the night shifts have been incredibly valuable in terms of helping to speed up the learning curve.
Yeah, and there's definitely been apparent with all of our students, really, how much their progress has transitioned even post on-site. And I definitely want to keep up with these night shift reviews for our students out there that are listening. Make sure you record those trades because those are pretty much free lessons. You make a bad trade, you get it shaken out. I mean, me, Rich, anybody's gonna give you that insight to what we see within that shake and what you can do better for the next time. It's really just a live evaluation. The community that's all focused on tape reading, and we all have the same issues. Whether we're not all 10 traders, so we all face issues and shakes. So it's just a great opportunity. Kind of transitioning to maybe more of a off tape reading question, but I'm just curious personally, is how is your maybe crypto world and crypto trading? Maybe is it related to any of the tape reading? Have you noticed there's any tape reading in the crypto world, or just what does that world look like for you?
Yeah, look, it's well, in terms of, I'll quickly touch on what my approach has been and then how I've seen reading have some relevance. So I've sort of had two general approaches, and the first one is sort of to trade the larger market cycles, and it's sort of if you
Mm,
understand, Wyckoff's accumulation and distribution. The beautiful thing with Bitcoin, if you look back at the chart over the previous market cycles, they're very fractal. They're
mm,
very history really repeats itself, and it's made it much easier to be able to get in pretty close to the bottom and to scale out as you're going parabolic into distribution. So that's been one approach, and then sort of a swing trading and sort of trading out of particular trade setups. I find that the fundamentals are all the same. Then technical analysis has some validity, especially over longer periods of time. But where the tape reading has come in, it's really helped in terms of timing. And there have been times where I've seen like an accumulation breakout, and sometimes there might be a throwback to test that line before it breaks out. And there have been times where I've taken trades where I've seen them do the exact same tactics that we've seen in the trading room, right? They might have, a massive order on the bid to prevent, the price from going lower. And then all of a sudden they start their aggressive buying. And I've used that at times to, be able to time entries where I've pretty much gotten in within, a few cents from the bottom, being able to see that sort of behavior in what the market maker is doing. And that works great, I think, these days with alts. I think as Bitcoin has gotten a lot bigger, the challenge is, and it's sort of, I guess, like, any sort of currency, is that it's traded over multiple exchanges. So, one exchange is not going to encapsulate all the orders and all of time and sales. So, and you can see that they have algos that are basically simultaneously trading, multiple exchanges. So it makes it a lot more trickier to sort of be able to tell. But the same rules apply. You get to a massive cycle level. Let's say it might be 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, and you see an order there. Well, it's, build prints are build prints, right? It might manifest in a slightly different way, but the same principles apply that we use in tape reading.
Yeah, no, that's awesome that the same principles of like market makers need to build and the games they play to accumulate or distribute is correlated to um, Bitcoin or any crypto of that size or scale. And is it the same like time and sales wise? Is it like, or is there?
Yeah, you get everything the same, except unless you're using some sort of platform, you don't get the filtered time and sales, but you get an order book. You get your time and sales as you would expect. And there's some great websites that'll actually sort of show you that almost sort of an equivalent of what we see in terms of the matrix and time and sales in TradeStation on certain websites. And there are certain websites that I use to be able to see that activity, and especially when it's volatile. When the stock has a lot of volume and it's volatile is where I think you see more of this sort of market maker tape reading type of behavior come into play.
That's awesome. That's great to know. I've always been interested on what that, because supply and demand is supply and demand despite what market it is, or equities or crypto. So it's really cool to see that the same kind of principles can be applied there. But I just want to take a moment to say thank you for your time to come on this podcast. I know you're a newer student, so it could be a little nervous, coming up here and really, explaining what challenges you face and, what you've been through or where you've been. So I just want to say thank you for that. And also, I want to say keep up the work when it comes to asking the questions. It's obvious that those individuals within our community that are just diligent about asking the questions and just focused on, coming to those night reviews and just outlining their journals and progressing and chipping away, it's very evident that your progress is, it's been stacking. So I just want to say keep up the good work and keep at it, and you're on the right path. So again, always appreciate your time and you coming and supporting all these review nights and everything. So
oh, look, thank you so much, David. And like I said, you sort of get what you give, and I think the job that you and Rich do is second to none. Now, from my experiences elsewhere, the level of care and the amount that you guys are willing to put in is second to none. No one else comes even remotely close. So thank you so much for that as well.
appreciate that, David. And that it concludes our podcast. Appreciate it, David.